All right, for this question, I'm going to show you a hack that is going to allow you to really just save a lot of time. And I want you to keep this in mind for other questions that you're going to see that are similar to it, and questions in particular that ask you to just go to a specific point in the text. It's not asking you to read the entire text, it's just asking you to focus on a very specific part of the text. So it would be the worst thing for you to try to spend a lot of time, waste a lot of time reading the entire text when it's just asking you to go to a specific place in the text. And for this question, it's just asking you to look at the start of the passages, how they begin for both passage one and passage two. And the question's asking you, what statement explains how Nixon and Ford begin their speeches in passages one and two? So the beginning of the speech, well, we're just going to go straight to paragraph one, for Nixon, and then paragraph, it's numbered 13, but it's just the first paragraph of Ford's speech. We're going to go to the first paragraphs of both of these speeches, and we probably are going to find everything we need in those first paragraphs. And what we might want to do first is just get an understanding, and you could be jotting these notes down to yourself on scratch paper, which you're going to have when you take the NJGPA. Something as simple as passage one, and then a brief summary of what you find there. And then passage two, another brief summary of what you find there, what you think the main idea is, for both of those paragraphs. And what we'll do now is we'll talk it out, but then I want you to think about which answer option best describes these beginnings of the speeches. And if you've written down your own summary on your piece of paper, then you can match it to the descriptions that you find in the answer options, and it'll be helpful to you because you'll have something to compare and match rather than just trying to figure out if it's correct or not, what you see in the answer choices. All right, so passage one. It says, "In all the decisions I have made in my public life, I have always tried to do what was best for the nation. Throughout the long and difficult period of Watergate, I have felt it was my duty to persevere, to make every possible effort to complete the term of office to which you elected me." So this is how Nixon begins his speech in passage one. And you know what we can do? We can just, for now, we can skip reading Ford's and we can go straight to the answer options to find what we think is the best description of Nixon's beginning to his speech. Which, by the way, if I had to describe this in my own words, and you can come up with your own summary, is Nixon is looking back to the past, and he's talked about his tradition or his history in politics, how he's always tried to do the best thing for the nation. And even throughout this, he calls it a long and difficult period of Watergate, throughout this scandal, he has stuck to his duty to try to fulfill what he was supposed to do for the American people as their president. So he's pointing to his history of duty and of living up to his duty. So as we look through the answer options, does he start by appealing to expert testimony? Did we see anything about that in the first paragraph of his speech? No. So it's not the right answer. Even if the second part ends up being accurate about what Ford starts his speech with, we already know that A is not a good option because it doesn't tell us how Nixon starts his speech. For B, does Nixon begin with a forecast of what he expects to happen in the future? No, the opposite. He talks about the past. B is not a good option. For C, does Nixon begin by appealing to values he thinks a citizen should have? Maybe, but that's a very kind of mismatch with what we read because he's more talking about his own personal experience rather than directly saying what he thinks a citizen should value. So that's not a very good option. We'll keep it as a candidate unless D just blows us away as the clear and obvious option. D says Nixon begins by talking about his past political career. Immediately, we know that is correct, right? And we can save time because if we look at D and it's accurate, we don't even really have to bother with reading Ford's speech. Now, if D and C were a little bit closer to each other and you couldn't decide, that's when you might say, you know what, I'm going to look at Ford's speech just to make sure and help me pick the best answer option between C and D. But D was just obviously better, so we don't really have to bother with that. We can save time this way. In case you were still deciding between D and any other answer option and you did need to look at Ford's speech, you can look at it and you can see that he actually is reminding his audience of a vow that he took when he was sworn in as president. They take this inaugural vow where they have their hand on the Bible and they make a vow to uphold the laws of the nation and the Constitution. And so you'll find that in passage 2, just like D says, Ford begins by reminding the audience of a solemn vow. And we've already talked about how Nixon begins by talking about his political track record, his political career. So D is the correct option, and it's not even close.